Twisted Metal 2, otherwise known as Twisted Metal World Tour, was released for the PlayStation in North America in late 1996 and then later released in early 1997 both in Europe and Japan. And this is the successful sequel to the ever popular Twisted Metal game that was released for the PlayStation in late 1995, as that was one of the first games to be released early in the PlayStation's life cycle. And if you're not familiar with the Twisted Metal games, it's a vehicular combat style game where you can drive loads of different types of unique and very obscure vehicles, where you can utilize various different weapons to literally destroy your opponents in each of the levels in question. As the first game in the series was one of the first of its kind to implement all of those gameplay aesthetics and factors, and it ended up being one of the most successful games on the PlayStation at that time, and the sequel took it to a whole new level. And Twisted Metal World Tour is considered to be the greatest car combat game or vehicular combat game on the PlayStation 1, if not in the entirety of gaming, as there has been so many vehicular combat games that have been developed over the years, but none of them have really come close to the success of this game and the first Twisted Metal game, as they are just so iconic. And it clearly shows, and you can clearly see why, as Twisted Metal 2 didn't change an awful lot that was popular about the first game, but it took everything that was really good about the first game and really scaled it up. You have more tracks and more levels to play on around different areas around the world, from Europe to likes of Japan, even like America, and you have a lot of the iconic characters that are brought back into the game, but you also have access to new characters with new and upgraded vehicles thrown into the mix with additional features that adds to the gameplay. The graphical style at first glance hasn't really changed all that much since the first game, but the levels themselves are a lot more open-ended or wider, and there's more areas to explore, and you have more deviations in terms of the track layouts where you can go over a lot more jumps, and there's a lot more areas to explore. That is one of the most unique features about this game, is not only do you have to fight off against opponents, but you can spend the entirety of the game or your playtime in a level exploring all of the hidden areas and features that are on offer, as each level in the game has tons of hidden areas that you can explore. That's ideally one of the most fun parts about this game. And what's really cool about this is that it also has a fantastic 2-player mode. I'll never forget myself and my brothers and even my mates renting this game out for a couple of weekends back in the early days when we first got the PlayStation, and we played this a ton. I kid you not, this was probably one of the most played games we had ever played on the PlayStation 2. This game is hands down one of my favourite games to ever be released on the system, and I think I'm not the only one that shares that view, as anybody that knows about Twisted Metal 2 straight away, they think about this sequel as it's so iconic. It's just brilliant, even though there has been subsequent sequels in the series, but they never lived up to the standards of this game and the first game in the series. Even more modern games on more modern consoles, like graphically they're a lot better, but they just don't capture that element of what this game had at the time. And a lot of reasons behind that too is because the likes of Twisted Metal 2 came out at a time when the PlayStation was at the height of its peers in terms of what was on offer. You had so many iconic games, and 1997 and even going into 1998 there was so many productive and excellent titles being released on the system, and a lot of experimental titles that really took off. But after the release of Twisted Metal 2, you had the likes of Carmageddon, which was a port of a PC game, which again was really good, but it wasn't as good as this game. But that is debatable depending on fans, because everybody has their own opinions on those games. But the car combat games were gradually starting to go into decline not long after Twisted Metal 2 was released, even though this game sold by the bucket loads. As Twisted Metal World Tour was a critical and financial success, the PlayStation version sold over 1.74 million copies just in the United States alone, and that wasn't even including other regions. And the game got excellent reviews across the board in the magazines. Now, the version was ported to the PC a couple of years later, but it didn't get as good a reviews, but it still was really playable and highly sought after. The game itself also got loads of awards, as it was runner-up for Electronic Gaming Monthly's Arcade Game of the Year, and it was only just beaten by Die Hard Trilogy. And it was also placed in one of the best 100 games of all time for the PlayStation. And in 2003, Twisted Metal 2 was also inducted into GameSpot's list of some of the greatest games of all time. So that will tell you how iconic this game is and how it had so much influence on the game genres and the games industry in general. There were so many unique features and cool concepts about this game. Just the whole atmosphere and vibe about this game was just absolutely brilliant. with a list of very cool characters and vehicles to play as in the game, all with their own unique abilities. And with the varieties of the levels in question, there was just so much to play even when you're playing multiplayer with your mates. It was so iconic being able to share so many memories and fun times with your friends, playing through, not only trying to take your mates out, but you'd be hiding on them. You'd find all the secret hidden areas in the levels that they wouldn't know about, and you'd be hiding on them waiting for them to explore, and as soon as they did, you'd just take them out and blow them to smithereens. So there was a bundle of laughs to have with this game. I kid you not, we used to play this game for hours on end. Like, we had so many laughs playing this game. This game really is so much fun. It's one of the best multiplayer games hands down that I've ever played, not just on the PlayStation 1 but in general. It was just so good back in the day, and even going back to playing it now as of recording this video, it does bring back a lot of those memories. Yes, the gameplay can be quite finicky and the controls can be almost tank-like in terms of how you control the vehicles, as they can be quite clunky, but the game is just so good you don't really consider that to be really much of an issue, because once you get familiar with the game and you get used to the layouts of the levels and how to utilize your weapons to the maximum effect, you'll just have an absolute blast with this game. So I highly recommend, if you have not played any of the Twisted Metal games and you're looking for something in this line to play Twisted Metal 2, or otherwise known as Twisted Metal World Tour. It is the best game in the series. It is the best car combat game hands down on the PlayStation 1, and probably the best car combat game ever to be released on any system, as it inspired so many games that came after it, but yet very few, if any, have ever managed to live up to the expectations of this game. This game really stands at the top tier of its crowd, basically, because it is that good, and it's clear to see why. This game has a huge fan base online, even to a point that back in 2007 this game was also re-released in North America and Japan on the PlayStation Network. So if you had a PlayStation 3 and you had access to accounts both in Japan or North America, or if you lived in those regions, you could get to buy this game on the PlayStation Store itself and then replay the game and relive all those old memories. So you have multiple opportunities to play the game. So I highly recommend, if you have not played Twisted Metal World Tour, you really do need to play this game. This is one of the best and most iconic games to ever be released on the PlayStation 1, and is one of pretty much the greatest games to ever be released on any system, as it's one of the most iconic games of all time. So you do need to check it out, and I would love to know your thoughts on Twisted Metal 2 for the PlayStation. If you have played it yourself back in the day, did you have as many iconic memories and fun times playing the game as I did back in the day? If so, then be sure to share your stories in the comments below, as I'd love to hear them. And if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be updated when future videos are released. And if you'd like to see more reviews and gameplay style videos of other games similar to Twisted Metal 2 that were released on the PS1, then make sure to check out the playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And until next time, make sure to keep playing those classic games and enjoying them, and keep those gaming memories alive.